Okay, let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pesach class. Um, and with Pesach almost upon us, as class we have tefillot for Geula Shlema and for health and success for all of our soldiers and healing for all of the wounded and just that things should go well. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is Egypt, but I'm not going to talk about what we usually talk about with Egypt around Pesach time, which is Yetziat Mitzrayim. I am not going to talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim. There will be many other people talking about that. What I really want to talk about is Egypt in other elements of Jewish history. We have had, Am Yisrael has had a complicated relationship with Egypt since almost the earliest days of our coming into existence. On the one hand, Egypt provides food for us, provides shelter, right? The Torah says, "Lo tita'ev mitzri ki ger hayita ba'artzo," right? That's really kind of a wild statement. You have to be allowing the Egyptian to come in amongst you, to marry among Am Yisrael, because you were sheltered by him, because you were taken in by him. That's kind of a very generous way to say we were enslaved by the Egyptians, right? On the other hand, right, it is the epitome of galut. Torah says, don't go back to Egypt, don't return. However, we did return to Egypt. So I wanted to explore some of this relationship, both before and very much after the story of the Exodus. And I called the class The Great Crocodile because, as I'm sure many people here know, right, there's a very large pantheon of Egyptian gods. Many of them take the form of animals, and the crocodile is a very big one, right? The crocodile god Sobek, one of the most potent Egyptian gods. Crocodiles, the animal ones, right, are very terrifying. They're in the Nile. They're very frightening, and Paro is often portrayed as the personification of this god Sobek, and that's why what you have in Sefer Yechezkel, right? And this is what I put here on the bottom. So I put it in Hebrew. Thus said the Lord God, I am going to deal with you, Paro, king of Egypt, great crocodile, sprawling in your channels, who said, "My Nile is my own. I made it for myself." Right? It's a very powerful, interesting description. I'll just read it in Hebrew also, so we have it. דבר ואמרת כה אמר השם אלוקים הנני עליך פרעה מלך מצרים התנים הגדול הרובץ בתוך יאוריו. He's rovates, sprawling. I don't know if that's the right translation, right? He's spread out. Asher amar li yaori v'ani asitini. We'll see that the Yaor, the Nile, is a very, very important part.
You're frozen.
We lost you completely, Shulie. But we still have the croc.
It's cute. We can't hear you, Shulie. You're frozen.
She can't hear us apparently either.
Is that better? Is it working?
Yes, now it's working.
Yeah, we hear you
Yes,
now,
now.
but we missed everything you said after reading the crocodile
I
sprawling.
didn't say anything
Yeah,
important.
Haskell.
Okay. We'll go back to slide number 2. Okay, good. Yes, if you don't hear me, so definitely break in and tell me. I don't know why that happened. Okay, so I wanted to go into timeline and also map, right? Understanding where the places are that we're talking about. As we're going to see in a moment, Okay, Egypt, of course, is along the Nile, right? That's where everything happens. That's where life takes place. So you have here the Nile. Egypt is divided. Upper Egypt, right? I know for us, we sort of think as south as down, but obviously upper meaning it's higher, right? This is the source waters of the Nile, all the way down in Ethiopia, Middle Egypt, and then Lower Egypt, the delta, right, where the river bed widens and finally flows out to the Mediterranean. So life takes place along the Nile River. Most of our story we're going to be talking about is places in the Delta, right? Of course, Alexandria, right? Cairo and Fustat, which is a suburb of Cairo. Leontopolis, which is where we have the temple of Honyo, of Onias. All of those are in Lower Egypt or in the Delta, okay? But we're also going to take a look down here, right, in the south at a place called Elephantine or Yeb, okay? And that's near the Aswan Dam, okay? So those are the places that we're really going to be talking about. And of course, our connection, right, to Sinai. We're going to be mentioning Sinai towards the end and our connection to the land of Israel because we are so close if we go through the northern part of the Sinai to the Gaza Strip, to Eretz Israel. So just keep the map in your mind as we're going along. A basic timeline. Right? We're going to talk about Paro Tutmos, who conquers the land of Canaan. Very, very significant event in the land of Canaan. Takes over Egyptian control over the land for 3 centuries. Okay? In the 12th century, we have something called the El Amarna letters found in Egypt, but letters coming from the land of Canaan to the Egyptian Paro. Okay? Jumping forward to the 5th century, okay? The time period of slightly after the destruction of the first temple, we have one of 2 temples that are going to be built in Egypt. Okay? One is the Elephantine Temple down here near Aswan. Okay, later we're going to see in the 2nd century the Onias Temple, the Chonyo, Mikdash Chonyo. Okay, people who are doing Daf Yomi at the end of Masachet Menachot, we talk about Mikdash Chonyo. Okay, in between we have the founding of the great city of Alexandria, very important Jewish community in Alexandria, and the place where the Targum Shivim, the Septuagint, is composed. Okay, 3rd century before the Common Era. The destruction of the Jewish community in Alexandria in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and really a large gap in Jewish history in Egypt from that point until Muslim times. Okay? Roman period, Byzantine period, Jewish community, we really hear almost nothing about the Jewish community of Egypt in those years. Right? Then we come back. Middle Ages, we have Rav Saadia Gaon. We, of course, have Maimonides, the greatest of the scholars of Egyptian Jewry, even though he thought of himself as a Spanish Jew, but he lives most of his life in Egypt. Another great scholar who we're going to talk about in the 16th century, the Radbaz, Rabbi David ibn Zimra, who ends his days in Tzfat. He's part of the story of the Golden Age of Tzfat, but he's a very significant rabbi for many years in Cairo, right? Jumping to the 20th century, Jewish community and Karaite community in Egypt very well off, very integrated, very important until, of course, State of Israel comes along, and then you have a lot of persecution and waves of leaving Egypt, both for Israel and other places in 48, in 56, in 67. In between those, you have the execution of a Jew and a Karaite. Okay? Moshe Marzuk was a Karaite doctor, and Shmuel Azar was a Jewish teacher, and they were both executed as being spies for Israel. Okay? The Sinai campaign and Israel's withdrawal from the Sinai, the peace treaty with Egypt. I didn't put on the timeline, but we'll get to that too. Okay, so that's our big picture timeline. Okay, carrying on. Just see if there's anything important. Okay, fine. So the first time that we actually hear about the nation of Israel outside of biblical sources is in an Egyptian stela, okay, a monumental victory monument, right? An inscription on stone. We have these all over, right? The Assyrians have these, the Babylonians, everybody has these. Okay, this is Paro Merneptah, and he's writing in the 12th century about, I conquered this one, and I conquered that one, and I conquered the other one, and he writes a whole list of places in Canaan that he conquered and destroyed. Okay, and then he has, of course, this is all hieroglyphics. He has this strange hieroglyphic, which is not a representational, it's not a pictogram, but it's sounds. And the sounds are Yise, Ra, El, okay, up until here. Okay, now you have this staff, which seems to indicate like a wandering. Okay, and then you have two images of people saying that this is not a human being, this is not a person, but this is a people. This is a nation. Okay? And it says, Yisrael, the wandering nation, has been laid waste. His seed is no more. Okay? It's the first time outside of Tanakh that we hear about a nation of Israel. Okay? And the very first time that we hear about them, they've already been destroyed, right? Other nations are always saying how they've destroyed us, that we're gone. And yet here we are. Okay, so that very first time that we are mentioned outside of Tanakh is here in the Merneptah Stela, discovered by Flinders Petrie, right, great biblical archaeologist and Egyptologist in the city of Thebes in the end of the 19th century in 1896. Okay, this, I think, is an amazing picture. I've used this a lot of times, so if anybody has been to other lectures of mine and has seen this, I apologize, but it's okay. It's a good picture. Satellite image of Egypt at night, and it's great because you can see that the only place where people live, of course, is along the area of the Nile and the Nile Delta. Okay, and the big burst of light here is Cairo, okay, and Alexandria up here. But the rest of Egypt, which is a massive country, right, it is a wasteland. There's nobody living there because you can't live there. You have to live alongside the Nile. And the Torah is very aware when Am Yisrael leaves Egypt and they are getting ready to go into the land of Israel and Sefer Devarim, okay, Moshe tells the people, it's not like the land of Egypt. And the pasuk goes on to say, you can you just can water with your feet. What does that mean? You can pump, right? You have paddles and you pump up water, and the water just comes from the Nile. The Nile is a constant source of water. The land of Israel, on the other hand, Eretz Harim Ubekaot, Matar HaShamayim Tishte right? It's a land that you're going to have water only from the rain. Eretz Asher Hashem Elokecha Doresh Otat Tamid. It's a land where you have to always be checking out your status with God, because if you behave, you'll get rain, right? And the very next section of the Torah is Vayayim Shamoa. If you keep the mitzvot, you'll get rain. If you don't, you won't. Egypt is not like that. Egypt is a place where you're going to have water all the time. The Nile is a constant source of water. And that's why Egypt is the breadbasket of the whole region. Okay. You're always going to have water, which means you're always going to have food. Now, you're not always going to have abundant water, right? We know Yosef and Paro, and Yosef says there are going to be 7 good years, 7 bad years. 7 bad years, what does that mean? There won't be as much water in the Nile as there usually is. And all over Egypt and in other places as well. By the way, this picture here on the right is from Tzipori in the land of Israel. You will see things called Nilometers, right? Which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way to measure the Nile, okay? And every year the Nile overflows, okay? It overflows in the summertime after monsoon season in Ethiopia. So it overflows August, September, okay? Water everywhere. If there's not enough of a flood, right? The flood is very important because it enriches the soil. You get this good, rich, black soil, and then you can grow stuff. If there's not enough water, you might have famine. If there's too much water, you'll have destruction. This flooding is something that's gone on for millennia. Today there's the Aswan Dam. It doesn't happen the same way, but it's very important to measure the water. The Nile also has a godlike status, right? And the priests are in charge of measuring the Nile, and it's part of a religious ritual. So this is what you see now in Eretz Israel, this place where water supply fluctuates, right? You don't know if you're always going to have water supply. What do you do when there's not enough water? You go down to Egypt, because in Egypt, there's always going to be food. And we know these stories, right? We're very, very familiar with these stories. Abraham, hey, there was a famine in the land. Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Yosef, right? Yosef is down in Egypt. There's a famine. Yaakov says to his sons, I skipped the middle one, we'll come back to it. So all the world came to Yosef in Egypt to procure rations, right? The whole world. That's great, right? The whole area. For the famine had become severe throughout the world. When Jacob saw that there were food rations to be had in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you keep looking at one another? I hear that there are rations to be had in Egypt. Go down and procure rations for us there, that we may live and not die. Okay, so very, very important. Egypt is this breadbasket to the whole world. Who is told not to go to Egypt? Yitzchak, right? Yitzchak has a special status. He is not meant to leave the land. Just checking the words here. Kol haaretz, right? World is not such a good translation. I knew it wasn't a good translation. All the land. Yitzchak is not meant to leave. There was a famine in the land, aside from the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. Yitzchak went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines. In Gerar, God appeared to him and said, don't go down to Egypt. Stay in the land, right? And this is going to be part of our story about what it means to go to Egypt. Going to Egypt is not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes it's a necessary thing. Abraham has to go. Yaakov has to go. They have to be saved from famine. But is it a good thing? Not always. Okay, so that's one of the things that we have in our relationship with Egypt is it is this source of sustenance, right? Sustenance that we don't always have. Okay, moving on. On the other side of the coin, right, of the Egyptians coming to the land of Israel, as opposed to the land of Israel coming to Egypt, right, we have the conquest of Eretz Israel in the 15th century by Thutmose III. Right? Thutmose III, very, very powerful king, comes, conquers much of the land of Canaan. We have testimony about this, right, in a huge temple in Karnak. We have pictures of Thutmose coming and subjugating the people of the land of Canaan, and hieroglyphics tells us where. So this image here on the right is Thutmose. You can see how huge he is, right? And he is subjugating the people, the Canaanites in Megiddo. And on the left here, you have the tell of Megiddo. Right? He comes through Wadi Ara, through the Jezreel Valley. He captures much of the land of Israel. Okay, and for the next 3 centuries, the Egyptians are the regional power. Now, what they do is a very interesting thing. What they do is they establish local, we would call them governors, right? But the Egyptians call them kings. Right? And there's a king of Megiddo, and there's a king of Beit Shemesh, and there's a king of Gezer, right? All of these little kings, but they're very weak. And each one is independent. Each one is dependent on the Egyptians. When I say independent, they don't band together. The people of Beit Shemesh do not think of banding together with the people of Gezer to fight against the Egyptians. They all look to the Egyptians to protect them, to sustain them. Now, the really interesting thing in most of these places is that the governors or the kings, whatever we want to call them, are locals. They're Canaanites. They're not Egyptians. Why? The Egyptians are the ruling power. Why don't they send their guys? Right? Because nobody wants to die outside Egypt. The Egyptians believe very, very strongly that the only entrance to the land of the dead, right, to the place where you go after death, the good place, is through Egypt. And if you die outside of Egypt, ooh, very bad. Right? That's why it's very shocking when Yaakov says, Al not tikbereni b'Mitzrayim, don't bury me in Egypt. What? What do you mean don't bury me in Egypt? That's the place you should be buried. And he says, no, I want to go back to the land of Canaan. So nobody wants these jobs. Nobody wants to be a governor in Beit Shemesh. The only place where we know there's an Egyptian governor is in Beit Sha'an. Okay, Beit Sha'an, we discovered amazing artifacts from the palace that was in Beit Sha'an. Presumably, it was the only reason that they were able to convince somebody to come from Egypt to be the governor in Beit Sha'an was that you got good perks. You got a beautiful palace with all kinds of statues and artifacts and all kinds of good things. We have some of the remains of that palace. A few years ago, there was a fantastic exhibit in the Israel Museum called Paro in Canaan, where they sort of redid, like they tried to show what this palace might have looked like, but all kinds of beautiful reliefs, statues of Paros. This is Ramses II, right? All different Ramses III, excuse me. They all look pretty much the same, right? And this was the one. This was the only place really where we had an Egyptian governor. Now we said all of these guys are very, very dependent on the power that is Egypt, and we know this because we have an amazing resource called the El Amarna letters. Okay? In the 12th century, there's a new paro. His name is Akhenaton. Right? This is him over here. Very interesting guy. He wants to replace the pantheon of gods with only one god. Some people suggest this is a form of monotheism, maybe, okay, but he moves his capital to a place called Amarna, but he's not successful. He doesn't do very well, and he dies, and the capital is moved back, but in the move, some things were left behind. And one of the things that was left behind are many, many letters. Okay. About 300 letters, which is what you see here on the left. These tablets, they're not hieroglyphics, they're cuneiform. Okay. They're being sent from outside Egypt to the Egyptian rulers. Over half of them are from the Canaanite rulers, and they follow a very specific pattern, which goes like this. Oh, Paro, you are the sun, you are the moon, you are the stars, you are the king, blah, blah, blah. I fall down on my face 7 times, 7 times. Send food, send soldiers, right? Help us out. Always help us out, because they're very weak. And that's very much to Egypt's advantage, right? They want to keep each one of these guys weak so that they don't band together against them. But what happens is that at the time period where Bnei Israel are leaving Egypt, you have a power vacuum. The Egyptians are not as powerful as they were. They withdraw from the land of Canaan, and suddenly all of these regional kings are just left without anybody who's their backup, who's their support. And so when Yoshua comes in with the people to the land, the kings kind of fall like dominoes in front of him. And you read Sefer Yoshua, and you read Perek Yud Bet, right, the 12th chapter, and it says the king of Gezer and the king of Chatzor and they're not kings. They're kings, but they're not really kings, right? And they all fall because they don't band together and they are not powerful. And this is where we have this fascinating pasuk. We have it in Shemot, we have it in Devarim, right? Variations, where Hashem says, don't worry about going into the land, don't worry about conquering it, because vishalachti et hatzirah lifanecha v'girsha et hachivi v'et hakna'ani v'et hachiti v'lefanecha. Tzirah, right? I didn't put in the translation, which a lot of times people translate as a wasp. What is this tzirah, right? So the commentaries say, oh, Rashi says it's some kind of a bug that brought disease. The people died. An Egyptologist about 100 years ago named John Garstang figured out this puzzle. He said, look at the symbols of the paros, okay? And the paros, one of their symbols at this time period is a tzirah, is a wasp. Okay, you see it here, see it even more nicely here. Okay, what is the pasuk saying? What is God saying? I'm going to send the Egyptians ahead of you. They're going to weaken the people. They're going to lay the ground for your conquest so that when you come in, everything's going to go easy for you, because the people are going to be so weakened by their experience with the Egyptian conquerors for the preceding 3 centuries. Okay, once we come into the land, what's our relationship with the Egyptians? So it varies, right? Egypt is always a regional power. Sometimes it's weaker, sometimes it's stronger, but it's always a regional power still today, right? Still a major player in the Middle East. You cannot do anything in the Middle East without thinking about Egypt. Okay. Are we allies or are we enemies? So once we get to the time period of King Solomon, right? King Solomon, powerful king. And one of the signs of his power is that he allies himself with the Egyptians, right? That's an unbelievable thing. Right? Here's this, we're this little upstart nation, and suddenly King Solomon is able to call himself the ally of Paro, king of Egypt. Now, how does he do that? How do people make allies in ancient times? Marriage, right? Solomon allied himself by marriage with Paro, king of Egypt. He married Paro's daughter and brought her to the city of David to live there until he had finished building his palace and the house of God and the walls around Jerusalem. Okay, and as a nice wedding present, okay, Paro decides that he is going to give a present to his son-in-law. Okay, what is it? Paro, king of Egypt, had come and captured Gezer. This is Gezer over here with the Solomonic gates, 6 gates. He destroyed it by fire, killed the Canaanites who dwelled in the town, and gave it as dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Nice present, right? Who needs China when you can get the city of Gezer? Okay, and Gezer becomes one of King Solomon's 3 major cities besides Jerusalem, right? Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. It's very much a cornerstone of his power. So this alliance is a very significant thing. On the other hand, right, King Solomon does exactly what the Torah says not to do. Don't marry too many wives. Don't have too many horses because you're going to bring the people back to Egypt. And we don't want to bring the people back to Egypt. And it all falls apart because his wives bring foreign influences, bring idolatry, and he's punished towards the end of his days. After he dies, the kingdom splits apart. And not only that, but the Egyptians go from being allies to being enemies. Okay? In the 5th year of King Rehoboam is Solomon's son, King Shishak of Egypt marched against Jerusalem, carried off the treasures of the house of God and the treasures of the royal palace. He carried off everything. He even carried off all the golden shields that Solomon had made. So this is a very dangerous tightrope to walk, right? Alliance with Egypt, or are we going too far? Are we returning to Egypt? And we'll come back to that in another minute. But I did want to show you these pictures. First of all, here, Gezer on the bottom. This is the Solomonic Gate of Gezer. Gezer's an amazing site. The top is a little bit of a fake out. I brought it just for fun. In the Kidron Valley, okay, right to the east of Jerusalem, below the Mount of Olives, you have a bunch of ancient burial caves and ancient graves. And this is a monumental grave. Okay, it's a, what's the word that I'm looking for? Give me that word that you have for a monumental grave. It'll come to me. You all know what I mean. Okay. Mausoleum. Thank you. This is a mausoleum. It is very lovely. It looks like a house. Okay. It is about 3,000 years old. Jerusalemites called it the grave of Paro's daughter, Kever bat Paro. It has nothing to do with Paro. It has nothing to do with Paro's daughter, but it says that King Solomon builds her a palace in the city of David, right? And in general, it's an interesting thing. Weird things in early modern Jerusalem were called Egyptian, right? Just like I don't know if there are people here who remember this when you grew up in America, that weird things are Chinese, right? Chinese jump rope, right? Chinese jacks. So for Jerusalem people in 19th, 20th century, Egyptian. So this is weird. It's Egyptian. It's Bat Paros. Just listening if that's a siren, but just an ambulance. Just kidding. Okay. Egypt also becomes a land of refuge. Okay. Again, going back to the story of King Solomon, okay, the challenger to Rehoboam, the one who splits the kingdom, is Yeravam. And when Solomon finds out about him as an upstart, he wants to kill him, and Yeravam escapes to Egypt. Okay, he runs away to Egypt. An even stronger and much more controversial escape happens at the end of First Temple times. And the Babylonians come, they conquer Jerusalem, They exile the people, they destroy the temple, but there is a group that is left behind, a She'erita Pleta, and their governor is Gedaliah, and he sets himself up in a place called Mitzpah, which today we know is Nebi Samuel. That's what you're seeing in the picture over here. Okay? But unfortunately, we have the terrible story of his assassination by Ishmael ben Netanyah, and then Ishmael is attacked by Yochanan ben Kareach, and he escapes. And finally, there's this small group that's left, and Jeremiah has been left behind with them. And Yochanan ben Kareach comes to Jeremiah and he says, "What should we do? Should we stay in the land or should we leave?" And Jeremiah asks God, and God says, "Stay in the land. If you remain in this land, I will build you and not overthrow. I will plant you and not uproot, for I regret the punishment I've brought about you. But if you say we will not stay in this land, we will go to the land of Egypt, so that we may not see war or hear the sound of the horns, and we may not hunger for bread. There we will stay." Oh, it's very contemporary. Escape through Egypt so you don't have any missiles. I'm sorry. Okay. Then hear the word of God, remnant of Judah. If you turn your faces towards Egypt and you go and sojourn there, the sword that you fear shall overtake you there in the land of Egypt. The famine you worry over shall follow at your heels in Egypt too, and there you shall die. So Jeremiah comes to the people and he says, "Don't go to Egypt. God said he's going to take care of you here. Don't go to Egypt." What happens? Instead, Yochanan, son of Kareach, and all the army officers took the entire remnant of Egypt, remnant of Judah, those who had returned from all the countries to which they had been scattered and had sojourned in the land of Judah, men, women, and children, the daughters of the king, all the people whom Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, had left with Gedaliah, as well as the prophet Jeremiah and Baruch, son of Neriah, and they went to Egypt. They did not obey God. They arrived at Tachpanches, also in the north, in the delta, a place called Daphne, okay, near El Arish. Tree actually found a temple there, and they disobey. They disobey Jeremiah, they disobey God, they go down to Egypt and they stay there. Now, the question is, why is it so bad, right? Here we have this refuge. Why is it worse to go to Egypt than to go to Babylonia, right? And that seems to be a theme in the Torah, right? Very much with the king, right? We said this a minute ago in Sefer Dvarim, right? He shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since God has warned you, you must not go back that way again, right? On the one hand, don't reject the Egyptians. They can marry you because they sheltered you, they protected you, okay? But don't think that Egypt is your home, is your place. Okay? And we have a lot of different answers to this idea, but I brought you two here. Rabbi Dr. Avram Yoshua Heschel, in his book, The Prophets, right, says very powerful idea. Why are we so against Egypt and Mesopotamia? The history of Israel begins in two acts of rejection: the rejection of Mesopotamia in the days of Abraham, the rejection of Egypt in the days of Moses. In both cases, it was a rejection of political and spiritual sovereignty. Egypt is an incredibly strong power, not only militarily, politically controlling the area, but their gods are incredibly powerful, right? We're in this time period where we're talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, talk about Moshe. Moshe comes and he says, "Oh, my God is going to take out the people," and Paro laughs at him, and the magicians laugh. "You think you're stronger? You think you can do these tricks?" The religion, the gods, the idolatry are incredibly strong. We can't go back that way again. Okay. Rav Hirsch, also talks about this idea on this pasuk in Devarim. He must not make the people return to Egypt. Ever since the start of Jewish history, the country of Egypt had served as a place of asylum for people living in the land of Israel in times of famine. The reason is Egypt is blessed with naturally fertile soil, right? Whatever we talked about earlier. This made the latter areas, especially the land of Israel, occasionally dependent on the Egyptians. This is the sense of the present warning to the people of Israel. You must not go back that way again. In other words, the Israelites are not to ever leave their homeland and travel to Egypt as they have done in the past in order to acquire their items that their own country cannot provide for them. The Torah demands that Israel sever any sort of dependence which they may have had in the past on the Egyptians, right? So Rav Hirsch is pointing out this strong connection that we've had. Why do we have to sever that dependence? Because we have to depend on God, okay? And Ishayahu, Yirmiyahu, they both say don't rely on that Mishenet kaneh ratzutz, this broken staff, okay, this bamboo staff that you're going to lean on it and it's going to break, it's going to smash into your hands. It's very painful. Don't rely on them. You can't rely on them. You can only rely on God. But all of these warnings do not actually work, and the Jews do go back to Egypt. And not only do they go back there, they survive there, they thrive there, and they make an alternate or an additional temple at least twice. Okay, we hear about two different times, and these temples are complex, right? It's not so clear. Are they meant to be for God? Are they meant to be for idols? Are they meant to be some kind of a combination? We know about temples, right, outside of Jerusalem, in Arad, in Beersheba, in Gilgal, right? This is not only outside of Jerusalem, this is outside of the land of Israel. The first one, the oldest one we hear about, is on this island in the south, in the southern Nile, Elephantine or Yeb. That's the picture that we see here with the Nilometer, by the way. These were Jewish soldiers, mercenary soldiers for Egypt, protecting Egypt's southern border. And they built a temple. How do we know about it? It was destroyed. We know about it because they sent letters to the Persian governor of Yehud saying, help us rebuild our temple. The Egyptians have destroyed it. Right? Fascinating. A few centuries later, in the second century of the Common Era, there's another temple that's built, and this one we actually hear about in rabbinic literature, and it's called the Temple of Onias, or Chonio. Okay? And the Gemara gives maybe fanciful, maybe real origin story, right, connected to jealousy among the people who were supposed to be, who were competing for the office of high priest. Okay, two brothers, sons of Simon the Just, Shimon HaTzadik. Only one of them could be the high priest. Onias, Chonyo, was jealous of his brother Shimei. Onias said to Shimei, come and I will teach you the order of the service of the high. Right? And he basically makes fun of it. He dressed Shimei in a tunic and girded him in a ribbon and stood him next to the altar. And then he goes and says, look what this man Shimei vowed and fulfilled for his beloved. He said to her, on the day I serve in the high priesthood, I will wear your tunic and gird your ribbon. Right? So he's basically like making fun of the Kehuna Gdola of the high priesthood. His fellow priests wanted to kill Shimei. Shimei told them the entire incident. The priests wanted to kill Chonyo. Chonyo ran away. They ran after him. He ran to the palace of the king. He went to Alexandria in Egypt and built an altar there and sacrificed offerings upon it for the sake of heaven. That's one opinion in the Gemara. As it is stated, in that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt and a pillar at its border to the Lord. Right? Very, very interesting. The Gemara says if a Kohen from Mikdash Chonyo comes to Jerusalem, we don't really want him to sacrifice on the altar. It doesn't say we should give him the death penalty. It doesn't say we should run him out of town. Just don't want him to serve in the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. All right, so very interesting, ambivalent approach. Okay, the great Jewish community in ancient times in Egypt is in Alexandria. Okay? Alexandria is a port city on the Mediterranean, founded by Alexander the Great in 333, becomes the Jewish hub in Hellenistic and Roman times. Some writers suggest that the Jews lived in 2 out of 5 quarters in the city. In this map here, you have this large Jewish quarter over here. This is not a map that's made by a Jewish historian. This is just explaining how important the Jewish community was. By the way, one of the wonders of the ancient world, the lighthouse of Pharos, is in Alexandria in the Great Harbor. And over here, sorry. And we have this great Gemara in Sukkah that talks about the synagogue, the fantastic, enormous synagogue of Alexandria, right? A lot of exaggeration here, but it must have been something impressive, right? One who did not see the great synagogue of Alexandria of Egypt never saw the glory of Israel. They said it was like a large basilica with a colonnade within a colonnade. At times there were 600,000 men and another 600,000 men in it, twice the number of those who left Egypt. Okay, maybe not. In it, there were 71 golden chairs corresponding to the 71 members of the Great Sanhedrin, each of which consisted of no less than 21,000 talents of gold. And this is the best part. There was a wooden platform at the center. The sexton, the gabbai of the synagogue, would stand on it with the scarves in his hand. When they reached the time to answer Amen, the sexton waved the scarves and all the people would answer Amen. Why? Because it was so big. No microphones. How do you know when you're supposed to say Amen? So he waved the scarves. By the way, I have a friend who was on Shlichut in Uruguay, and they had Rosh Hashanah services, also huge numbers of people, and they did this. They waved scarves so people would say Amen. So, but it comes from here. Okay. The other really great thing in this Gemara is that this is a community that has guilds, almost like Landsmannschaft, right? The guilds sit together, they hang out together, and they take care of each other. The members of the various crafts would not sit mingled. Rather, the goldsmiths would sit among themselves, the silversmiths, the blacksmiths, the coppersmiths, the weavers. And when a poor stranger entered there, he would recognize people who plied his craft, and he would turn to join them there. And then he would secure his livelihood as well as the livelihood of the members of his household, right? Something we should do today. It's a beautiful idea, right? Unfortunately, the end of this Gemara says, but they were all murdered by Alexander. That's the Bavli. Clearly, they were not murdered by Alexander. Alexander is only the one who creates the city. But the Yerushalmi, which is closer to the area, knows what happened, says, no, 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 they were all murdered by Trajanus, Trajan's revolt, which is true, right? The Jewish community in Alexandria was destroyed during the time of Trajan's revolt. But before that, we also have another interesting story. Okay, the Ptolemies, okay, the rulers of Egypt in Hellenistic times, build one of these incredible wonders of the ancient world, the Great Library of Alexandria. This picture here is the Great Library of Alexandria is destroyed in antiquity, but in modern times, Egypt decided to also build a beautiful library in Alexandria. Okay, not to be compared to the National Library in Israel. They have a fraction of the books, but it is a very beautiful building. And according to some Jewish sources, among them something called the Letter of Aristeas, also the Gemara, the Ptolemy II arranges, he wants to have all the books in the world, and he wants to have the Torah. Okay, and what does he do? He doesn't have the Torah. He wants to have it in Greek. He doesn't want it in Hebrew. And so he arranges for scholars to be brought from the land of Israel to translate the Torah into Greek. And this is what we call the Targum Shivim, the Septuagint, because of the number of people who come to translate. Okay? The rabbis don't like this idea. They're worried that a translation, as everyone knows, translation is always an interpretation, sometimes a distortion, and they're concerned about this. And it actually was a fast day at one point. At the 8th of Tevet, it was a fast day because the Torah was translated, was taken out of Hebrew and translated in different languages. In the end, it's very important because the Jews of Alexandria, as well as many other Jews in the diaspora, don't speak Hebrew. They speak Greek. Okay? But the Gemara describes it like this. It was a miraculous translation. There was an incident involving King Ptolemy of Egypt, who assembled 72 elders and put them into 72 separate rooms and did not reveal to them for what purpose he assembled them. He told each one, write me a translation of the Torah of Moses, your teacher, right? And he's wondering, is they going to give different explanations, right? The Holy One, blessed be He, placed wisdom in the heart of each and every one, and they all agreed to one understanding. They all translated in the same way. Let's go back to Alexandria for one moment. The Alexandria Jewish community is destroyed in the 2nd century, and there's almost no Jewish community, or at least not a Jewish community that we really hear about for centuries. And we really don't hear about Jews in Egypt until the Muslim conquest, and even then, not very much. The first time we really hear something significant is when we hear about Rav Saadia Gaon, right? One of the great medieval scholars, born in the late 9th century. He starts out in the area of Cairo, eventually goes to Tiberias in Israel, eventually goes to Babylonia. He becomes the head of the yeshiva there, but he starts out in Egypt. But the real great, the Jewish Egyptian great, Like I said, he saw himself as a Spaniard, not as an Egyptian, but he spends a great amount of his life in Egypt, is, of course, Maimonides, right? The Rambam. And Rambam is born in Spain, but there is terrible persecution, a Muslim persecution. The Almohads, his family flees to North Africa, and eventually they get to Egypt via the land of Israel. The Rambam had a what we call a Yisachar Zvulun relationship with his brother David. The brother was a merchant and made a very good living to support them both. And then there's a terrible tragedy, both a financial but largely a personal tragedy. David's ship is lost at sea. He dies, and the Rambam, first of all, loses his brother. It's the most terrible part, but also loses his livelihood. And so he, among all the other things he does, he becomes a doctor to support himself. And he's a doctor eventually to the Sultan. Who is the Sultan in the Rambam's time? Salah ad-Din, okay, the great conqueror of the Crusaders. The Rambam lives in Fostat, which is Old Cairo, the suburb of Cairo. There are legends that Richard the Lionhearted, okay, also same time period, Crusades, wanted the Rambam to be his personal doctor. The Rambam refuses, okay, and he stays in Egypt. And he has an unbelievably, incredibly busy life. And I just had to bring you this because it's just such a great source. The family in Provence of Ibn Tibon. Okay? The father is named Judah, the son is named Samuel, Shmuel. They are translators. They translated books from Arabic, Jewish books from Arabic into Hebrew. And of course, they want to translate the Rambam, right? The Rambam writes some of his books in Arabic, and Shmuel Ibn Tibon writes him a letter, and he says, I really admire you, and I want to translate your books. I really want to come and meet you and sit with you, because how can I translate your books if I haven't met you? And the Rambam writes him back this letter, right? And this letter is basically, if you've ever felt like, telling people, oh, my life is so busy, read the Rambam. I live in Fostat, and the Sultan lives in Cairo. The distance between them is 4,000 cubits, a mile and a half. My duties to the Sultan are very heavy. I must see him every morning to check on his health. If one day he doesn't feel well, or one of the princes or the women of his harem doesn't feel well, I cannot leave Cairo that day. It often happens that there's an officer or two who needs me. I have to tend to healing them all day. Right? Then, therefore, as a rule, I am in Cairo early each day, and even if nothing unusual happens, by the time I come back to Fostat, half the day is gone. Under no circumstances do I come earlier, and I am ravenously hungry by then. When I come home, my foyer is always full of people, Jews, non-Jews, important people and not, judges and policemen, people who love me, people who hate me, a mixture of people, all of whom have been waiting for me to come home. I get off my donkey, wash my hands, and go into the hall to see them. I apologize and ask that they should be kind enough to give me a few minutes to eat. That is the only meal I take in 24 hours. I'll remind you all, no coffee. Then I go out to heal them, write them prescriptions and instructions for treating their problems. Patients go in and out till nightfall, and sometimes, I swear to you by the Torah, it is 2 hours into the night before they are all gone. I talk to them and prescribe for them, even while lying down on my back from exhaustion. And when night begins, I am so weak I cannot even talk anymore. Because of all this, no Jew can come and speak with me in wisdom, right, Torah, or have a private audience with me, because I have no time except on Shabbat. On Shabbat, the whole congregation, or at least the majority, comes to my house after morning services, and I instruct the members of the community as to what they should do during the entire week, because besides his full-time job and his caring for the sick in the community, he is the head of the Jewish community of Fostat. We learn together in a week fashion until the afternoon, then they all go home. Some of them come back, and I teach more deeply between the afternoon and evening prayers. That is my daily schedule, and I've only told you a little of what you would see if you would come, meaning don't come. Okay. But despite this, right, or in addition to this, the Rambam manages to find the time to write some of the greatest works of halacha and philosophy. Okay. Of course, he writes the Mishnah Torah, the Yad HaChazakah, right, basically his rewriting of the Mishnah. He writes the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed. I brought you here a copy of his signature, Moshe B'Rabbi Maimon. Okay, but often he would sign his name also Hasfaradi. okay, the Spaniard, because that's really how he saw himself as part of this great tradition of Spanish Jewry. So that's the Rambam. Definitely, if we want to have, the five great Egyptian Jews, the Rambam is number one. But another very interesting one, yeah, who's somewhat less well known than the Rambam, is the Radbaz, Rabbi David ibn Zimra. Okay, he is also born in Spain, a few centuries later, but when he is a young man, a teenager, we have the expulsion from Spain, right? He's born in 1479, 1492. His family has to leave. They go to Tzfat, then he goes to Fez in Morocco, and in 1517, he's still pretty young, comes to Egypt, okay, to Cairo, and he becomes the chief rabbi, where he remains the chief rabbi for 40 years. Okay, and he writes books and he has very important students, among them Rabbi Bezalel Ashkenazi, among them the Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, before he comes to Tzfat. After 40 years in Cairo, he's had enough. He's a wealthy merchant, by the way. He doesn't need to make money from the community. He makes money from his business. After 40 years, he's had enough. And he says, I'm going to retire. He goes to Jerusalem, but too much strife in Jerusalem, and he makes his way to Tzfat. And he spends the last 20 years of his life in Tzfat. He studies and is in the court, the rabbinical court, with Rav Yosef Karo, right? This is the golden age of Tzfat. He's in Tzfat during that golden age. He writes a lot of things, but the most important work that has come down from it for us from him is his responsa, his she'elot teshuvot. He has responsa questions from all over the Jewish world. Some of them business disputes, some of them religious ritual questions, some of them the status of the Karaites, because there's a large and important Karaite community in Egypt. He has an interesting approach to philosophy. Somebody comes to him and says, someone in my synagogue makes fun of Jews who study philosophy and calls them heretics and says they pray to the God of Aristotle. He says, God forbid, what a terrible thing to say. There are many great rabbis who study philosophy. My students shouldn't study philosophy, but many great rabbis have studied philosophy. But probably the most famous of his tshuvot is the one about Ethiopian Jews. And this is a very interesting thing. Ethiopian Jews essentially were cut off from the rest of the Jewish world. And occasionally here and there we hear about them, but not very much. Now, because the Radbaz lives in Egypt, Egypt is right next door to Ethiopia, at some time periods, Ethiopian Jews kind of showed up. Usually they were slaves. Okay? They were slaves and they were redeemed by the Jewish community. And he gets questions about them, right? Can we marry them? Are they mamzerim, right? What's their story? And he has two responsa about them. And this is, I think, the most famous one, right? He says, even though there's a doubt in our mind, since all of these chabashish, right, chabashim, who live in the land of Cush behave according to the religion of the Karaites, meaning they don't accept Torah Shabbal Peh, they don't have Torah Shabbal Peh, who are like Tzadok and Baitus, the Sadducees of Second Temple times. We are not commanded to redeem them or to revive them, right? He's talking about the Karaites. In any case, it seems to me that they live among the rabbis and they see the words of the sages and mock and ridicule them. He's talking about the Karaites here, about whom and like they say they lower and not elevate, and they are the accursed family that the late Maimonides wrote. This is all the Karaites. The Karaites know rabbinic law and they reject it. But those who come from the land of Cush are undoubtedly from the tribe of Dan. Okay, he's relying on a very early testimony from the 9th century, a guy called Eldad Hadani, who says the Ethiopian Jews are from the tribe of Dan. And because there are no sages among them who possess the tradition, they grasp the plainness of the scriptures. But if they had taught them, they would not have broken the words of our rabbis. And woe to them as a baby that was taken captive among the Gentiles. Okay, so he's saying a few things here. First, he's saying Jews, 100% Jews. They come from the tribe of Dan. Second, the fact that they don't have Torah Shabbal Peh does not make them heretics. Just makes them Tinok Shenishba. They don't know. They just don't know. Okay, now, a few hundred years later, in the 20th century, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, then the chief rabbi, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, reads this tshuva of the Radbaz, and he says, the Radbaz says they're Jewish. They're Jewish. I say they're Jewish, and therefore they are Jews by the law of return. This is the reason that Israel brings the Ethiopian Jews in Operation Solomon and Operation Moses. Okay? It's based on Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who is basing himself on the Radbaz in the 16th century. Right? Fascinating. Okay, a few last things. Ooh, we have a lot and not a lot of time. Okay, one other very important thing from Egyptian Jewry is the Cairo Geniza. Okay, Geniza is where you put your holy books once you cannot use them anymore. You're torn Chumashim or Sifrei Torah or Sidurim. But in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo, okay, the community there had a very strict view of what should go in the Geniza. And essentially, they put any of their correspondence, their contracts, their letters, their ketubot, their poetry, everything went into this geniza, packed into this attic of the synagogue. It is discovered by a number of people in the 19th century, most famous, Dr. Solomon Schechter, who you see in the picture here, who's told about it by two British non-Jewish sisters who had gone to see it. He buys much of the collection and brings it back to England, to Cambridge University, and it's still being studied today. It gives us amazing, amazing picture of medieval Jewry, particularly Egyptian Jewry, but not only. And his description of it is a great description. It is a battlefield of books. The literary production of many centuries had their share in the battle, and their disjecta membra are now strewn over its area. So the Cairo Geniza, very, very important product of Egyptian Jewry. We had mentioned that there's a large Karaite community in Egypt. People who were in my previous series, we talked about the Karaites. Okay, is a very well integrated, well known, right? Muslim Egyptians knew about the distinction between Rabbinite Jews and Karaite Jews. There were synagogues in the old section, the old Jewish quarter of Cairo. This is a picture of a newer synagogue built in the 1930s in a wealthier area. The synagogue is called Musa Deri. You could see it's a beautiful synagogue. Interesting, it has what mosques have, which is a place to keep your shoes because the Karaites don't wear shoes in the synagogue. One of the most famous Egyptian Karaites is the gentleman here, Moshe Marzouk. He was a doctor, he was a Zionist, he was recruited by Israeli intelligence in 1951 to take part in spying activities and in a false flag activity in the 50s in Israel, which they were betrayed. There's something called the Lavon affair, very complicated, very terrible. They were betrayed by an Israeli double agent, and he essentially took the fall so that other people would not be captured. And he was executed alongside Shmuel Azar, who also took the fall in January 1955. Eventually, in 1971, they were both brought to Israel and reburied on Har Herzl. The Karaites, like other Egyptian Jews, are essentially forced out of Egypt. Post 48, post 56, post 67, and they come to the land of Israel. They settle in various places around Israel, mostly cities, but in a few farm communities, Ranen, Beit Ezra, Matzliach. Hey, this is the synagogue in Matzliach. And much of the leadership of their community is Egyptian Jews, right? Egyptian Karaites. Okay, so that's the Karaite community, very important part of the Egyptian community. And we'll just finish up with a few words about Sinai, okay? In 1956 and 1957, we have the Sinai campaign. Nasser closes the Straits of Tiran, okay? Israel, with the assistance kind of behind the scenes of the British and the French, go and attack in order to open the Straits of Tiran. They are astoundingly successful on the one hand. On the other hand, they are forced to retreat, but it's a proving ground for the young state of Israel, for the young Israeli army. However, it has a terrible effect for Egyptian Jews, and Karaites, those who had stayed behind and had not left yet. Essentially, really, there was a lot of persecution and assets that were taken away, and they had to leave. And it was one of the death knells of the Egyptian Jewish community. The second one, of course, was the Six-Day War. All right, the third one, really, Six-Day War, where Israel takes the whole area of the Gaza Strip and the Sinai. So terrible effect for Egyptian Jewry, but Israel decides that they are going to build both in the Gaza Strip, what we call Gush Katif, as well as in the northern Sinai, the area of Rafiah, and they start plans to build, first of all, a large city. Okay, Yamit, it's going to be a tourist center, an economic center, as well as many smaller communities. There are very, very big plans. Yamit was meant to be for 200,000 people, plus a few communities down in the south near Eilat. However, after the Yom Kippur War, things change. Anwar Sadat reaches out to Israel, the first Arab leader to come to Israel to speak in the Knesset for his own reasons, but it's still an earth-shattering event. And after many, 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 many long and complicated talks in Camp David, Israel agrees to withdraw from the Sinai in exchange for normalized relations with Egypt. And this withdrawal is very painful, very terrible. It's the first time we're going to see this repeated, of course, in the story of Gush Katif and in northern Shomron. But this is the first time this happens, and there's a lot of resistance. But ultimately, in 1982, Israel withdraws from all the communities in North and the South Sinai. These communities move to other places, Chabel Shalom, Gush Katif, other places, and the Sinai returns, it goes to Egypt. Gush Katif stays in Israeli hands, of course, till the disengagement. And I'll just finish with the words of Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu, two different things that Yeshayahu says, right? Parak Yud Tet says, Bayom hu yeh Yisrael shalisha lemitzrayim ula Ashur bracha bekerev haaretz. Okay? And God is going to make Egypt and Assyria and Israel together, serve him together. And then, of course, we have the other very famous pasuk, Bayom hahu yitaka b'shofar gadol uba'u ha'ovdim be'eretz Ashur v'hanidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim v'yishtachavu la'Hashem b'har hakodesh b'Yerushalayim. The picture here is not a picture of the end of days where the Egyptians are going to come back to Eretz Israel. It's actually a picture from 1946 from the Maccabiah, the Egyptian delegation coming and marching, right, in a parade, all the delegations from all different countries. And this is the Egyptian Jewish delegation coming to the Maccabiah in 1946. So we can hope that the prophecy of Yeshayahu will come true soon. Let's take a look. Do we have anything in the chat? Okay. Paro's daughter is actually buried. No, we don't know. It would be very cool, but we don't actually know, right? Did she return to Egypt like the traditions? Who knows? Doesn't tell us in the Torah, and we don't know. Uh, Alert, alert, alert. Ay, ay, ay. I'm sorry. I hope everyone who had alerts didn't have to run to the shelter. The library in Alexandria is amazing. What, the modern one you're talking about? Yeah, it looks beautiful. All right, one day we'll get to Alexandria. When did the Rambam have time to daven? Davening is what you're worried about? When did the Rambam have time to write his books? Davening, I'm guessing he perhaps did on his donkey. But yes, it's crazy. He might have exaggerated a little bit, but probably not too much. Yes, no Netflix for the Rambam. Okay, everybody should have a beautiful Pesach, and we should have Milot for Geulah Shlema, and everything should be good.
Julie,
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Julie,
Yes.
yesterday on
Yeah.
Tuesday in the New York Times science section, there's a whole article about Tutmos III and the destruction of the statues of Hatshepsut and all the
interesting. Okay.
Yes.
I wonder if I can still find it. I'll look for it.
It's Tuesday, March 24th, and it's the
It could
front
be
page.
on the site still. Maybe I'll find it on the site.
Yeah, absolutely. The front page of the science section. And it's about what the theories were about why all her statues were basically destroyed or mutilated in one way or the other, and what the existing theories were, and how this more recent archaeologist has a new theory, and but it's exactly about Hatshepsut and Tutmos III.
Right, but wasn't she also the first
still read the
pharaoh?
New York
That's why
Times for
the female
science. We're
pharaoh.
allowed.
Yes, science and wellness are good sections.
All right.
There's a new novel about Hatshepsut. Really interesting. That's kind of cool. Tell us more.
She was a female Paro.
Yeah, she
She's a
was
female
15th
Paro, I know.
century, and
She's the one that has the beard, right? They make the statues of her with a beard.
Oh, so let me see.
Yes,
Can you see
yes.
this?
Try
Wait,
to
can you see this
pretend she's
picture?
not a woman.
Here's the picture that they have.
That's right.
Oh, cool. All right, I'm gonna
Yeah.
look it up.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I've seen in the Met they have the statues of her with a beard.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Well, they had
All
these
right.
false beards. There wasn't a real beard. They put, they made these.
Yeah, fake beards, but it's a
Yeah.
symbol that she could be the Paro, even though she's
That's
a
right.
woman.
Yeah, she
Right?
apparently had 20 years of a very successful reign, and he was her. Well, Thomas II was her both husband and brother, and Thomas III was her stepson. And after he took over, the question of how he viewed her and whether he wanted to get rid of all her, any memory of her, or whether it was a whole different thing, why they were
Right.
destroyed.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Much.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful to
Bye-bye.
hear.
Chag Sameach.
Interesting. Chag Sameach. We should hear good news.
Sameach.